Avui ens acompaña el doctor Joe Dispenza. Doctor Dispenza, bienvenido.
Gracias.
Usted defiende que nosotros, por sí solos, podemos sanar la enfermedad, nos podemos curar por sí solos, ¿no? Sin necesidad de ir al médico, sin necesidad de tomar ningún medicamento. ¿Cómo se entiende eso?
Well, I spent about 10 years studying people that were diagnosed with serious health conditions. Cancer and diabetes, high blood pressure, MS, lupus, chronic pain, anxiety and depression. They were diagnosed with a typical medical protocol, and then they were treating with the same conditions like classical medical procedures or alternative medical procedures, and they were either staying the same or getting worse. But after a period of time, they got better. And when I investigated the changes that took place with these people, they had four things in common. These were the four things that made them better. Now, I'm not saying that everybody who has a sickness has the ability to do this, but I noticed that with these people that had spontaneous remissions, these were the common factors. The first thing they had in common is that they all accepted and believed that there was a spiritual quality living within them. Now, I want to demystify that spiritual quality because it's not outside of us. It actually is, it's the intelligence that's giving us life. That same intelligence that's keeping your heart beating over 8 liters of blood per minute, over 100,000 times in one day through 60,000 miles of blood vessels. That intelligence that's organizing all your bodily functions, that intelligence has an awareness. So these people began to look to see if they could make contact with it, if they could direct it, if they could give it a plan or a design, give it something that they wanted, and then surrender the condition to this greater intelligence. So they began to develop a relationship with the spiritual aspect of themselves. The second thing they had in common is they understood that it was their own mismanagement of their emotional reactions that created their disease. It was their 20 years of fear, their 30 years of anger, some emotion that they memorized that was connected to a primitive nervous system that's based in survival, that's based in stress. And so they began to decide that they no longer wanted to be a certain way. They decided that they had to change that emotional state because the only person that they were actually hurting is themselves. Every time they get angry at somebody else, the chemicals that are created from that reaction do more damage to their bodies than to anybody else's. And it's a scientific fact at this point that the chemicals of stress dysregulate or downregulate genes, and that create disease. And that 75 to 90% of every person that goes to a doctor in the Western world goes because of a stress-related disorder. Now, what makes human beings so unique is that we can turn on the stress response just by thought. We could think about a future event that may or may not happen, and we can obsess about that thought so much so that the body begins to respond as if the event was happening. We can think about a past bitter memory, and we can focus on that memory over and over again until the body begins to respond as if that past event was happening again.
como si ese evento que ha pasado en el pasado estuviera sucediendo ahora.
And so, in essence, our thoughts make us sick.
En esencia, nuestros pensamientos nos hacen ponernos enfermos.
Well, the next question is if our thoughts can make us sick,
La próxima pregunta es si los pensamientos nos pueden hacer enfermos.
can our thoughts make us well?
Entonces también los pensamientos nos pueden mejorar.
So they began to break the habits
A romper esos hábitos
that were connected to an old personality, to an old
estamos
self.
conectados con la vieja personalidad.
That was probably the most difficult thing they had to do,
Eso es la parte más difícil que ellos han tenido que hacer.
because those chemicals from
Esas
stress
químicas que se generan a través del
that are
estrés,
survival based
que están basadas en la supervivencia,
are very addictive.
son muy adictivas.
They give the body a rush of energy.
Ellos provocan mucha energía en el cuerpo.
And so breaking that addiction
Y romper esa adicción
required them overcoming a lot of elements in their bodies.
requiere que hayan un montón de elementos involucrados.
But the latest research is now showing
Las últimas investigaciones muestran
that the primary thing that stimulates genes
que lo que más estimula a los
are the
genes
emotions inside our body.
son las emociones dentro del cuerpo.
So by reacting in the same way every day,
Reaccionando de la misma manera cada día,
they kept pushing the same genetic button
estamos apretando ese botón genético a todo momento
that created their disease.
que crea las enfermedades.
So by breaking the addiction,
Entonces, rompiendo a través de al romper esa adicción,
they no longer continuously switched on the gene.
entonces evidentemente no estarán enchufados a ese gen.
And so their body began to have a break
El cuerpo empezará a tener un poco de descanso
from the redundancy of the same chemical signals.
la redundancia de esas señales químicas.
Now the third thing they had in common
La tercera cosa que tienen en común,
is that they decided that they had to reinvent themselves.
saben que tienen que reinventarse a sí mismos.
They had to become somebody else.
Tienen que llegar a ser alguien diferente.
They couldn't think the same way.
No pueden pensar de la misma manera,
They couldn't act the same way.
no pueden actuar de la misma manera.
They couldn't embrace the same emotions as they did every day.
Abrazar las mismas emociones que ellos abrazaban antes.
They started to ask themselves really profound questions.
A preguntarse entonces otras preguntas
Profundo.
muy profundas.
Questions like, what would it be like to be happy?
¿Qué sería ser feliz? ¿Cómo me sentiría?
Who in my life do I know that's a happy person?
¿Cómo sé que alguien es feliz?
What would I have to change about me to live in joy?
¿Qué tengo que cambiar dentro de mí para vivir en la dicha?
Who in history do I admire that I want to be like?
¿A quién en la historia admiro? ¿A qué personaje de la historia admiro y a quién me gustaría parecerme?
And as they began to ask these questions,
Y tal como empiezan a preguntarse estas preguntas,
and they waited for an answer,
entonces ellos esperan por respuestas.
something happened very uniquely in their brain.
Algo muy único pasa en sus cerebros.
When they decided no longer to be that same personality,
Cuando deciden que no van a ser más ese tipo de personalidad,
by restraining those behaviors,
restringiendo todos esos comportamientos,
those attitudes,
esas actitudes,
those emotional reactions,
esas reacciones emocionales,
they were literally shutting the lights out in the brain in those areas
es como que estuvieran apagando un poco las luces en el cerebro.
that were connected to the old self.
Están conectadas con el antiguo yo.
And as they began to think about a new way of being,
Y en el momento que empiezan a pensar en ser otra persona diferente,
they started to make their brain work in new sequences, new patterns, and new
entonces hacen que su
combinations.
cerebro funcione en diferentes secuencias, que utilice diferentes patrones.
And that whenever we make the brain work differently,